In the last class, we looked at two important aspects of reading in academic context: skimming or reading for general understanding, and then scanning and skimming. That is what we do when we are reading for specific information. We now move on and look at reading for detailed understanding. So, recall here that we skim through a text to get an overall understanding of the text and to decide whether we should read it in detail or not. Now that you have decided to read it in detail, we should focus on in-depth comprehension of that particular text. We can take notes, we add comments, and people follow different methods while reading for in-depth comprehension. At this stage, we should look at the role of background knowledge in in-depth comprehension. We say that reading occurs in a context. Let us look at a quote by Buber. We do not find meaning lying in things, nor do we put it into things, but between us and things it can happen. Let us look at it in detail. So, what does this mean? We do not find meaning lying in things. So, you have a text before you. The meaning is not completely in the text, nor do we put it into things. Does it mean you as a reader go with a lot of previous knowledge, and that previous knowledge helps you put meaning into what you read? Not necessarily. What actually happens is an interaction between your previous knowledge, your background knowledge, and the text you are reading for the first time in any particular context. So, now let us look at a text. This was part of a psycholinguistic experiment. Let us first look at the text and then we will discuss what significance it has. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. Otherwise, you are pretty well set. It is important not to overdo things. That is, it is better to do too few things at once than too many. In the short run, this may not seem important, but complications can easily arise. A mistake can be expensive as well. Let us look at the next paragraph. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated. Soon, however, it will become just another fact of life. It is difficult to foresee any end to the necessity for this task in the immediate future, but then one can never tell. After the procedure is completed, one arranges the materials into different groups again. Then they can be put into their appropriate places. Eventually, they will be used once more and the whole cycle will then have to be repeated. However, that is part of life. So, can you guess what this text is about? What is the task that is being described here in this particular text? It sounds bit complex to understand, and we may not actually easily guess what it is about. Now, here is a piece of information for you. This particular passage is about washing clothes. Now that you know the topic, let us go back to the same text. Now, let us read it. Does it mean different to us now? The procedure is actually quite simple. It means washing clothes. First, you arrange things into different groups. Now, we know what the word things here refers to, that is laundry, clothes. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. So, if you do not have a washing machine, you go somewhere else. So, that is what this is about. Otherwise, you are pretty well set. It is important not to overdo things. That is, it is better to do too few things at once than too many. So, what is it talking about? It simply says, do not overload your machine. If you are a novice, start with a few clothes, and then you are set to go. In the short run, this may not seem important, but complications can easily arise, something like overloading issues. A mistake can be expensive as well. If your washing machine develops a problem, then it can cost you a lot. That is what it is about. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated. Soon, however, it will become just another fact of life. You have, say, fully automatic machine, it presents you with different kind of options. So, in the beginning you are confused, you do not know how to operate it. So, that is what it is about. Soon, however, it will become just another fact of life. It is difficult to foresee any end to the necessity for this task in the immediate future. So, we wear clothes, they get dirty, we have to wash them. So, that is what it is about. But then one can never tell. After the procedure is completed, what is the procedure here? Washing clothes. One arranges the materials into different groups again. So, we sort them and put them in wardrobe. Then they can be put it into their appropriate places. Eventually, they will be used once more, and the whole cycle will then have to be repeated. However, that is part of life. So, when you looked at this text in the beginning, without knowing that this is about washing clothes, the whole text looks like a puzzle. And when you know that the topic is washing clothes, the meaning, how you approach the text changes, and you seem to make meaning out of the text. So, this is what we call interaction between the background knowledge the reader has and the information presented in the text. When these two interact, then the meaning emerges. This text is taken from a journal article, Contextual Prerequisites for Understanding Some Investigations of Comprehension and Recall. You will, if you go to this particular article, you will find similar such text and you can practice reading them and try to understand them. We move on. So, as I mentioned, if we do not know the topic, the understanding is limited. Sometimes we say this text is difficult for me to understand, I cannot understand it. One of the reasons could be unfamiliarity of the topic. If you are unfamiliar with the discipline, say you are from science background and you are reading something about philosophy, then it may sound too complicated. As we saw in this example, the sentences themselves do not change when you know the topic, but the interpretation in our minds, it changes. Therefore, background knowledge is equally important in meaning making process. So, keeping that in our mind, we move on. So, when we read for detailed understanding, what actually happens? Several researchers have proposed different theories. One among them is what is proposed by Writing Center, University of Toronto. According to the researchers here, when we read for detailed understanding, reader usually asks three kinds of questions. They are classified as analysis asks, interpretation asks, and evaluation asks. For our purposes, we will look at the first two, analysis and interpretation, in this lecture. We will look at evaluation when we look at critical reading in detail. So, what does analysis mean and what does interpretation mean? First one, analysis. So, here we as a reader attempt to understand the organization patterns of the text. We look at the parts to detect patterns, then analyze the arguments of the author. We need to ask ourselves several questions about the organization patterns. So, what are these questions? Let us look at these questions. What is the main idea or the central argument? So, you have a text before you. We will see in the forthcoming lectures that texts can have different organization patterns. For example, narration, description, exposition, and so on. So, if it is an expository text, say for example, causes of poverty in India. So, there are points 1, 2, 3, 4. So, here you understand the points. If it is an argumentative text, say for example, should TV reality shows be banned? So, if the writer has presented an argument, so what is the main argument in that text? So, that is what we first need to ask ourselves and try to find out. Then, what are the supporting points? How do they relate to each other and to the main argument? Recall here, in one of the earliest classes, we mentioned that if you have an argument in academic context, it is supported, it has to be supported with enough evidence. So, we ask question, what are the supporting points and how are these supporting points related to one another, and then are they actually related to the main argument being made? We will look at a text and then understand these things soon. Let us first look at these questions we need to ask ourselves. The next question is, what are the examples used? How do they relate to the points they instantiate and to the main argument? If the writer has given examples, we analyze them too. So, how do they relate to the points they instantiate? I make a point and then I give an example. So, we have to examine if the point made and the example cited, they are properly linked. And then how are these examples related to the main argument? Next, what techniques of persuasion are used? We will look at these different techniques of persuasion when we discuss argumentative text. There are basically three kinds of techniques. They are called appeal to emotion, appeal to reason, appeal to authority. I will explain these things very briefly here. Appeal to emotion means you appeal to emotions of your audience. When you say appeal to reason, you present evidence, you present statistics and you try to convince. For example, you are arguing for, say, cutting down CO2 emissions and reducing global warming. If you are appealing to reason, you will give stats to support your argument. From this year to this year, so much CO2 emission and therefore, so much increase in the global temperature and therefore, we need to take concrete steps. If you are appealing to emotion, probably you will show a picture of polar ice melting and So, if you are appealing to emotion, you will probably show a picture of polar ice melting and polar bears suffering. So, here you are appealing to emotion. The third one is appeal to authority. You quote an expert on, say, global warming and use that to strengthen your argument. The next is, what rhetorical strategies are used? So, has the writer used definition, explanation, description, narration, elaboration, argumentation, evaluation or any other strategy? What modes of analysis are used? Illustration, comparison, contrast, cause and effect, process analysis, classification, definition and so on. Let us now look at a text and then ask these questions to ourselves and try to analyze the text. This is an extract from the text called Language and Learning, written by James Britton. Let us read this first. Your representation of the world differs from mine, and this is not only insofar as the world has used us differently, that is to say, we have had differing experiences of it. It is also because your way of representing is not the same as mine. Neither of us is a camera. A part of what we do at any moment can in fact be explained in terms of the camera. For just as the screen of the camera bears a picture of what is there outside, so our representation of the world is a partial likeness. It is a partial likeness because at any moment, at the same time as we are drawing in from the outside world, to put it very crudely, we are also projecting our own wishes, our hopes and fears and expectations about the world. Our representation of that situation is the resultant of the two processes, that of internalizing and that of externalizing. And because what you project is a function of your personality, your mood of the moment as well as your habitual ways of feeling and thinking about things, and what I project is a function of my personality, our representations of the shared situation will be different. Moreover, the way I represent similar situations on different occasions will be different. Thor Heyerdahl in the story of Kon-Tiki records how the party had a frightening experience with snakes one afternoon in the garden of a place they were visiting. Later that evening, we are told they were sitting indoors by the light of oil lamps, and they mistook the giant shadow of a perfectly ordinary scorpion for the shadow of a giant scorpion. Their representation, in other words, was strongly influenced by the feelings set up by the previous experience. Now, let us try to analyze this text and understand it. We start from the beginning. So, how does the paragraph begin? So, if you look at how it begins with a statement, and you understand that it is the main idea. The main idea of this particular section is that your representation of the world differs from mine. So, two persons' representations, they are never going to be the same. So, this is the point. Then why does the writer say that people's representation of the world differs? So, what are the reasons for this factor? This is not only insofar as the world has used us differently, that is to say we have had differing experiences of it. So, this is point number 1, we have had different kinds of experiences. Second, it is also because your way of representing is not the same as mine. So, this is point number 2. Our modes of representation, our methods of representation are not the same. Because of these two reasons, the writer makes a claim here that representations of the world are not the same. Okay. Then we come across the word camera. So, the question is, why does the writer talk about it, and what is its relation with the topic discussed earlier? We have earlier seen that the topic is representation of the world. So, the question is, why does the writer talk about camera and how is it related to this topic? So, let us look at where the word camera appears. Neither of us is a camera. A part of what we do at any moment can in fact be explained in terms of the camera, for just as the screen of the camera bears a picture of what is there outside, so our representation of the world is a partial likeness. First, the writer says neither of us is a camera. So, it is not like it is something out there and you capture it as it is. So, that is not going to happen. But then writer says in some other aspect we are like a camera. How? See, the screen of the camera bears a picture of what is there outside, but that is not an exact replica. So, it is only a partial likeness, that is the next key word we find. So, whatever we capture bears a partial likeness to what is there out. So, camera also does the same thing. It is not an exact 100% replica of what is there outside. Okay, we move on. So, continuing, partial likeness comes because if you look at this part here, at the same time as we are drawing it from the outside world, we are also projecting our own wishes, our hopes and fears and expectations about the world. So, you can say that the exact replica of the world is a sort of, you can say, corrupted by our own wishes, hopes and fears, expectations about the world. So, therefore, at best we can say there is partial likeness, but it is never going to be an exact replica. Okay. And then the next key word here is processes. So, what are these processes and how do these processes lead to different representations of the world? So, we locate the word processes in the text, that of internalizing and that of externalizing. So, these are the two processes the writer here is talking about. And because what you project is a function of your personality and what I project is a function of my personality, our representations of the shared situation will be different. So, as the writer mentions here, so going back here, our hopes, fears, expectations and so on. So, these things are projected onto what we see and these things differ from individual to individual and therefore, there is difference. Okay. Then here we find reference to a person Thor. So, who is this Thor Heyerdahl? And there is also reference to story called Kon-Tiki. So, if you do a bit of research, you will come to know that Thor was a Norwegian explorer and Kon-Tiki was, you can say, a sort of his travelogue. So, why does the writer refer to this here? So, let us go back to it. So, Thor records how the party had a frightening experience with snakes one afternoon in the garden of a place they were visiting. Later that evening, we are told they were sitting indoors by the light of oil lamps and they mistook the giant shadow of a perfectly ordinary scorpion for the shadow of a giant scorpion. Their representation, in other words, was strongly influenced by the feelings set up by the previous experience. So, the party here has already had a frightening experience with snakes and then when they come across a shadow a little later, they think it is the shadow of a giant scorpion, because at this moment their viewing of the situation is greatly influenced by their previous experience. So, here the writer uses this to make a point here somewhere up if you go. Moreover, the way I represent similar situations on different occasions will be different. So, here their representation of this ordinary scorpion was greatly influenced by their previous experience. Had they not had that frightening experience with snakes, probably this also would have been different. So, now that we have read it, so can we go back to this question and ask ourselves what is the main idea of the paragraph? So, writer here very clearly says that our representations of the world are different. These differ from individual to individual and also from context to context. This is not going to be an exact replica of what we see outside, what we feel, because there is also projection of individual personality, and therefore, it differs. So, this is how we analyze the given text, ask questions about the organization and ask questions about the examples and how it is connected to the main point. In that way, we can clearly understand any given text. We move on. The next step is interpretation. So, what do we do here? We ask the question, what do these patterns of the argument mean? Here, we need to be aware of the cultural and historical context of the text. We need to be aware of author's life, the context of debates within the discipline at the time, and then today. So, how, if things have changed, do they influence? So, we need to understand these things. So, at this stage, we ask question about the context in which the particular text was written and try to place it in that particular context. Let us look at an example. Here is an extract from the text, emphasis on sport, and it is written by Brecht in 1926. Let us read it first. We pin our hopes to the sporting public. Make no bones about it, we have our eye on those huge concrete pans filled with 15,000 men and women of every variety of class and physiognomy, the fairest and shrewdest audience in the world. There you will find 15,000 persons paying high prices and working things out on the basis of a sensible weighing of supply and demand. You cannot expect to get fair conduct on a sinking ship. The demoralization of our theatre audiences springs from the fact that neither theatre nor audience has any idea what is supposed to go on there. When people in sporting establishments buy their tickets, they know exactly what is going to take place, and that is exactly what does take place once they are in their seats, namely highly trained persons developing their peculiar powers in the way most suited to them, with the greatest sense of responsibility, yet in such a way as to make one feel that they are doing it primarily for their own fun. Against that, the traditional theatre is nowadays quite lacking in character. So, when we interpret a text in context, the questions we ask ourselves are: what debates were the author and the text engaging with at the time? So, in this context, Brecht writes about theatre, and here he is arguing for modification of theatre. He compares theatre with sports and says that theatre has to present things which people like to see. So, this was written in, as mentioned, in 1926. Brecht was still struggling with his ideological conflicts, and he was working on a theory of theatre. What kinds of reasoning, historical, psychological, political, philosophical, scientific, etc., are employed here? Here you can see that Brecht compares theatre with sports. So, he takes something from contemporary context, contemporary society, and puts forth his argument. Other questions we ask are what methodology is employed and what theory is developed. How might my reading of the text be biased? Am I imposing current ideas or values on the text? If so, is this problematic? So, as mentioned here, Brecht says theatre has to remodel itself along the lines of sports. Now, at present in the 21st century, we may not agree with it. Several theories have come after this text was written, and the perception, the views about theatre have changed dramatically. So, therefore, the views of Brecht presented here may not appeal to us. So, if we analyze the text, if we look at this text in the current context, then it might become problematic. So, in order to understand why Brecht wrote it, you need to read history of that period, you need to understand some background, you need to know what was happening in Brecht's life, what was theatre in Germany at the time and in Europe, and many other such things. An understanding of the particular context will help you understand this text in a better way. We move on. This third aspect, some people refer to it as application. So, what does this mean? Here we apply ideas from the text to solve problems, apply the ideas to personal experience, compare ideas in text with ideas from outside the text. We imagine extensions of the text and we fit the ideas presented in the text into a wider field as in a review of the literature. So, for example, you are doing say research on writing abilities of primary school children. So, you read a particular text about how children begin to write. So, this particular study you have read, now you need to place it in the larger context of a review of literature. You have to see what other studies have done and how this particular study is different from or similar to those studies, and then decide how many sections from it you are going to include or you are going to discard. So, you place the given text in a larger context. Also, sometimes you apply ideas from the text to solve problems or you apply ideas to personal experience. Then you compare ideas which are presented in the text with what you see outside, with your personal experiences, your outside life experiences. So, this is called application. So, for example, you read something about police in physics and then you use it to accomplish a difficult task in a more easy manner. So, that is a kind of you apply what you have read into your personal life. Okay. Now, we will look at a detailed text and try to read it in detail. The text is called How Weather Has Changed World History. This is taken from National Geographic Learning. So, let us first read the text and then try to understand it. It is tempting and often comforting to think that humans control their fates. The decisions that people make in their daily lives can affect many things, and the course of their lives cumulatively reflects these many small decisions. On the other hand, people cannot control every aspect of their environments, and forces beyond human control frequently intervene in human affairs. Notwithstanding many people's opinion that the weather has little influence in their lives, besides determining what clothes they wear on a particular day, the weather has in fact caused world history to radically shift in important ways that are still felt today. Okay. So, let us look at this paragraph in detail. The title is How Weather Has Changed World History. So, by just looking at the title, can you guess something about the content? So, most likely the text is going to talk about how weather has influenced world history. So, these influences may be positive or negative. So, we can expect that the text is going to give some instances and then explain how weather played an important role. Coming to the first paragraph, let us look at how it begins. It is tempting and often comforting to think that humans control their fates. So, it starts with a statement: the decisions that people make in their daily lives can affect many things, and the course of their lives cumulatively reflects these many small decisions. So, it kind of says human beings take decisions and these decisions affect our lives. So, in a way human beings control their own fates. Then it moves on and says, on the other hand, so this linker is very important, it brings in contrast here. So, what was just discussed is general feeling, what many people feel, but what is going to come next. People cannot control every aspect of their environments. So, this is the statement. Forces beyond human control frequently intervene in human affairs. So, not just human decisions, there are things which human beings have no control, and these things can also influence our lives. So, see how the writer is introducing the topic. So, one of these things which can control our lives is weather, and if you come to the end of the first paragraph, the writer clearly says weather has greater influence, it just does not decide what we wear. In fact, the weather has radically changed the world history. Key word here is radically. So, the main idea is this thing, that weather has in fact caused world history to radically shift. How is the first paragraph connected with the title and the remaining text? So, we know the title, weather has changed, how weather has changed world history. The first paragraph comes to weather slowly, starting with what people generally believe in, and then it comes to this. So, this is a kind of top down approach. How is it connected with the remaining text? The first paragraph ends with a statement that weather has caused world history to radically shift. So, we expect there are going to be instances of this. Some keywords you can focus on while reading. Okay, we move on. This is the second paragraph. Numerous examples from world history document the long-term effects of weather in the formation of cultures and nations. In the 13th century, Kublai Khan ruled over the vast Mongol Empire, which spanned from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Black Sea in the west, from present-day Siberia in the north to Afghanistan in the south. To expand his reign further, Kublai Khan mounted two invasions of Japan. Two monsoons, however, caused him to end his attacks. Delgado, 2008, describes legendary accounts of this event. The legend, often repeated in countless history books, speaks of gigantic ships numbering into the thousands, crewed by indomitable Mongol warriors, and of casualties on a massive scale, with more than 100,000 lives lost in the final invasion attempt of 1281, page 4. Because of this unexpected defeat, Kublai Khan decided to stage a third invasion of Japan, but he died before he could fulfill his ambition. Without these monsoons, Japan might have been defeated by the Mongols and thus lost its identity as a unique culture, with far-reaching consequences for Asian and world history. So, the question is, what is the main idea and how is this connected to the previous paragraph? So, this paragraph talks about one instance where weather significantly changed the course of history. This is about Kublai Khan and how his invasions of Japan failed because of monsoons. So, note few things here. So, one is this is Mongol Empire, Asia. This was somewhere in 13th century. Okay. So, now we move on. This is the third paragraph. In the early years of America's Revolutionary War, which began in 1775, it appeared likely that the British would crush the armies of a colonial territory and incorporate it back into the empire. The British troops were a well-trained and disciplined army that was feared worldwide. In contrast, the American troops were newly trained, sometimes poorly organized, and lacked sufficient resources to fight effectively. General George Washington could have easily been defeated in the Battle of Long Island on August 22, 1776. Historical records show that Sir William Hovey, the British commander, was clearly defeating Washington on Long Island and was actually winning handily. Seymour, 1995. Nonetheless, the weather intervened when a heavy fog rolled in, so the American forces were able to retreat, regroup and survive to fight another day. Because of this fog, the United States was not defeated in its struggle for freedom. Consequently, today's United Kingdom of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland does not include the United States. The United States is not a commonwealth of a mother country as Canada and Australia are, though the United States still has strong ties to its colonial past. So, what is the main idea here and how does this carry forward the central idea of the text? How is it related to the central idea? So, this paragraph gives another instance from world history where the weather changed significantly the course of action. This is in 1775, 18th century, then this is about the United States. You can also here observe another feature which we have already highlighted, that significant citation and referring to experts to strengthen your argument. In the previous paragraph as well, the writer quotes an authority, and in this paragraph as well you see some citation. So, this paragraph gives another instance, and that is how it is connected to the main idea. Okay. We now come to the next paragraph. When Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia in the early 19th century, he met with early successes that appeared to guarantee that he might eventually rule the world as his personal domain. His soldiers captured Moscow and destroyed the city, which encouraged him to push farther in his military campaigns. However, because of his dreams of glory, Napoleon overlooked the simple fact that Russian winters are extremely cold. When the temperatures fell below freezing, many of his soldiers and their horses died in the brutal weather. As Belloc 1926 writes in his classic study of the Napoleonic Wars, the cold was the abominable thing, the dreadful enemy against which men could not fight and which destroyed them. Page 217. As a result of the failure of Napoleon's Russian campaigns, his own rule ended relatively soon after. His defeat led to a reorganization of power throughout the European nations, as well as to the rise of Russia as a major world power. So, what is the main idea here? This gives another example. Now, Napoleon, this is from Europe. So, examples are again related to the main idea. Now that we have looked at 3 examples in 3 paragraphs, do we see some pattern? This one is 13th century Asian context, and the weather phenomena here is monsoon. This one American context, North American context, 18th century, weather phenomena here is actually fog. This paragraph, European context, 19th century, and weather phenomena is the cold. So, you can see that the examples are spread geographically as well as chronologically. Okay. Now, we come to the final paragraph. As these 3 examples unambiguously demonstrate, the weather has caused numerous huge shifts in world history as well as in power balances among cultures and nations. Without the rainy storms of the monsoon season, Japan might be the eastern outpost of Mongolia. Without the appearance of dense fog, the United States might still be a territory of the United Kingdom, and without winter snow, Muscovites might speak French. Today, weather forecasters can usually predict with a high degree of accuracy when thunderstorms, hurricanes, tsunamis and tornadoes will strike, but the course of history cannot be fully isolated from the effects of the weather. So, what is the function of this concluding paragraph? This sums up the examples and it again reinforces the main idea. Let us look at some keywords here. Unambiguously, so it is about very strong conviction. So, how strong it is and do you believe in it, that is the topic for our discussion in the next class, that is reading critically. Why does the writer mention here the present day weather forecasters? Here the writer brings these things towards the end to say that now things have changed and we can predict. So, one might think they are not going to have significant effect, but the writer here says the course of history cannot be fully isolated from the effects of the weather. So, this is how we look at a text. We start with the title, guess what the content is going to be, and then look at each paragraph in detail, asking ourselves how is this paragraph related to the title, what is its function here, and then what are the connections across paragraphs, what is the role of concluding paragraph, what is the writer doing in the concluding paragraph. So, these kinds of questions help us analyze patterns and then also ultimately understand the text in detail. Thank you.